Hello, Guru Nation. Welcome back to another episode. This is, we do these biotech ones from time to time, and then we do it through our other channel, the Clinical Research Circle. And we've got a really special company here, one that really garners the excitement and enthusiasm of the interwebs and of social media at large, and that's Curative Biotech. And they're like a really small market cap company. We
Right.
happen to have the CEO, Richard Gar, on, and we're going to talk a little bit about Richard's background. He's CEO and general counsel at Curative Biotech, but he's got a really interesting background, really experienced background in the life sciences industry. We wanted to focus a little bit on that because it's not too often that we get to actually see and profile the CEOs of some of these companies. So we're gonna get into a little bit of Richard's career, a little bit of his background, and then we're also going to discuss obviously Curative Biotech. They've got a lot of exciting stuff in the pipelines. Myself, Chris, Monica, we've all done a good amount of homework on the background of this company and what's in the pipeline. We haven't done as good homework as some of you guys on the internet. This is an unbelievable level of due diligence. People have time to go deep. I mean, deep into these companies. But thank you guys, and we're going to get into some of the audience questions, viewer questions. And so, thank you, Richard, very much for coming on. How are you doing today?
It's fine. Thank you for having me.
Can we get into like just can you give us like maybe a 3 minute summary of your career so far?
Sure, shorter than 3 minutes, hopefully. So for almost 20 years, I was about 17 actually. I was the president, CEO, and one of the founders of NeuralStem, which was a human neural stem cell company that started on the old Amex, went to the New York Stock Exchange, MAIR, they call it, I think, and then NASDAQ. And I started that company with the founding scientist, Dr. Carl Joe. We took the technology out of NIH, which is a pattern that you'll see repeated in this company. And we were treating through transplantation degenerative nerve diseases, ALS, spinal cord injury, stroke. We also had a small molecule drug development program based on screening against the physiologically relevant human neural stem cells. And we developed first-in-class drugs to treat depression and cognitive deficits in various diseases. Probably about 5 years ago, my son, who's always been a brain tumor patient, developed a new series of problems. And so I left NeuralStem. And then about a year and a half ago, we had a remarkable recovery, and he's doing great, knock on wood. And so I thought it was time to go back to work. I had met Paul Michaels, who's the chairman of our company, a very successful biotech entrepreneur down in Florida. And we decided with Michael Grace and Ron Borden's two PhDs who spent, I think, between them at least 50 years at places like Shearing Plough and Bristol Myers Squibb, who were also looking to kind of do something. We got together and decided that we had enough experience between us to create a therapeutics company, but we all wanted to do something very different, right? So you might notice that the model for this company is very different than a typical biotech startup, which all of us have been part of, and then all the way through, large company status. So the point here was to create a company that would mitigate the risks that are typically involved in a startup therapeutic company. And so one of the big risks is almost every company, and my first company was the same way, is based on a single technology or a single platform. It might be a cascade that someone's discovered. It could be a protein. And there might be various uses, but it's a single technology, right? And so no matter how many applications there are, if there's a failure somewhere, they all fail. So between us, we had a broad enough experience in almost every area you could think of, from gastrointestinal to neurology to from small molecules and peptides to cell therapy and gene therapy, that we weren't restricted in looking for programs to bring in. The second area that we wanted to do to mitigate risk was we were only interested in programs that had what we call inflection points that will create real value within a 2-year window. So the typical startup, right? You get something early, you're 5 years before you can have a clinical trial, the patent is running. So we're looking for things that, again, because of our joint experience, we could find a way to create a serious inflection point in a 2-year window, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the third major part of trying to mitigate against risk. So typically when you start a company, and I've done this before, right? You have your plans and you're expanding all the time, right? You eat up capital because you have to expand to be able to get to the next step. So we decided that we would also only do programs where we could outsource all of the infrastructure that we could, all of us having literally worldwide experience in handling large multi-vendor tasks. And that's kind of our model. And then the final point was we're not built to commercialize these programs, right? We reserve the right to do that. But basically our model is find something that people don't get why there's value, use our experience to create this inflection point, and then get it out the door, license it, sell it to a larger company, partner it that has the resources and the appetite to take it through, launch and commercialization. And so that was the genesis. We decided that the best vehicle for that was to buy an existing company. We bought this OTC markets company. I think at the time it was called Kinetics. And you go through the process of cleaning it up. It was not a shell. That's a very important thing to understand, but it was not a fully operating company at the time. And so we took control of that and cleaned up, whatever we could, which was everything. This was a pink sheet company. We hired a PCAOB auditor, right, which is what you need, to file a Form 10, which we'll be filing soon with the SEC to become fully SEC reporting. We're currently pink current information, which is why so many people know so much about us. It's very similar to the SEC reporting. It's just not through the SEC. It's directly through the OTC markets. They have a vehicle for that. So the idea, again, was to create this company, bring in product into it, move them through, hit these inflection points, become fully SEC reporting, right? And then I think that's one of the reasons that you see everybody knows so much about us. We're very transparent, right? Everything's out there. And that's kind of the way we think that we're growing the shareholder base.
So in regards to CTYX, I believe that's Kinetics.
Yeah.
What was the reason for that company in particular? Why not, I guess, just go on your own with a new company? Why do that?
They had a shareholder base. One of our founders, Barry Ginsberg, Dr. Ginsberg, was involved with that company. He was not on the board, but he was a shareholder. So he knew of the status of the vehicle, and he knew the then CEO, and he thought it would be, a good place and a good way to get control of the vehicle.
Gotcha. Yeah, okay, thank you for that. And you guys are pursuing, I love it because the diversification is fantastic, especially you don't see that in such a small cap biotech where you have three completely different things you're pursuing. You have eye disease, rabies, and brain cancer. What drives your decisions in deciding what rare disease to pursue? I mean,
Sure.
how do these things, they're unrelated, right? How do they all
Yeah.
come together at once?
So the primary mover here at the beginning was we've all had a lot of experience dealing with large pharma, large biotech, and NIH. And after, decades of that, you're aware of lots of programs that are always floating around these places that fall out of favor for one reason or another. Not because of the science, right? It could be because they lose an internal champion. It because somebody leaves and goes to California from Washington, and whatever it is, right? And so I think we probably went through literally 1,000 available opportunities from NIH, from all the different institutes, and tried to find, the ones that we thought fit our model. Again, get to an inflection point soon, right? Serious diseases. It's hard, but we went through them, and at the National Cancer Institute, we found the CD56 monoclonal antibody. It's the first humanized CD56 monoclonal, and they had tried to treat neuroblastoma with this by combining it with this new class of drugs, the PBD drugs, which are unbelievably potent, right? 100 to 1,000 times more potent than chemotherapy. But potent in biotech is just another word for toxic, right?
Right,
Because
right,
potency is kill the cell, right? Kill the cancer.
right.
And so it was just sitting there because a lot of the big pharmas are trying to figure out how to use this. But systemically, once that stuff gets in you, right, the CD56 monoclonal antibody is ubiquitous. It's all over in lots of different places. In my earlier incarnation at Neuralstem, we had the similar problem to treat spinal cord injury and ALS by delivering human neural stem cells directly to very specific points inside the spinal cord. It had never been done before, right? Inside the white matter, the gray matter of the spinal cord. And our surgeon, Nick Bolus from Emory, who had developed this technology at the Cleveland Clinic, figured out a way how to focally get the cells in. So I called Nick and I said, look, is it possible to figure out a way to get this monoclonal antibody with this PBD warhead into the brain, directly into the tumor, so you don't get the systemic toxicity? And he came back after a while and said, yes, I think there is a way to do it. And we are now working on that. But that was the genesis of this program. That's why it was sort of available for us to take, right? This is a unique approach to getting this delivered focally to treat brain cancer, solid tumor brain cancer. We then went, so the NEI, National Eye Institute, also has a trove of IP that's available to license. And again, as I was looking through it, my background with Neuralstem, right, I'm intimately familiar with how valuable screening against physiologically relevant human cell-derived assays are. That's how we discovered 189. It's how we discovered our drugs. Big Pharma does not like that, typically because screening against cells is too information rich. They like to do things where they can put, 10,000, wells at a time, high throughput, and they want one answer. Are we binding with this or are we not? They don't like to do information rich screening. They consider that earlier work or prior work. So the Dr. Kapil Bharti at NEI, his actual passion and specialty was growing RPE cells, retinal epithelial cells in the back of the eye, from IPS, induced pluripotent stem cells. So you can take a skin cell from a patient and grow these things up and push them backwards in time and then push them forward to become sort of any cell you want. You can't really transplant them because you're messing with the cell's reproductive mechanisms, but you get pretty close to physiologically relevant cells. And he had created RPE cells from patients with various genetic eye diseases. That's what they do at NEI, is try and study the basic science behind this. And it was pretty clear to me that that's really valuable information when you can screen against that. And one of the things he had done was put lots of different drugs, but metformin was one of them on the RPE cells. And looking at the various mechanisms of action involved in these diseases, he saw a strong impact. Now, he went down that path because there are about half a dozen very large meta studies from people like Kaiser Permanente and things like that, where they just went back and looked at, say, 5,000 patients over 15 years that had diabetes, right, who took metformin. And then they looked to see when did they develop their macular degeneration, age-related macular degeneration. And there seemed to be about a 2 to 2.5 year lag. Right? Now, again, this is not causation, it's just correlation, right? But that's what gave him the impetus to push down this path and look further at the mechanisms of action involved. And again, then he had this unique window on those, right, through his cells. And he came up with this. He filed the patents at NIH through NEI. We actually, when I saw this, we actually licensed it before it became, when it was still a provisional patent. It was provisional in the US, and they had also filed the PCT. And I should mention another part of our model is we're only interested in things with sustainable, serious IP, right? Worldwide, serious, sustainable IP. So again, this checked all the boxes in our model. And I negotiated the license with NEI, and that's how we ended up with that one.
Wow.
The rabies drug's a little different. So IMT-504 is basically, it's a ODN, and I'm not going to mispronounce it by trying to tell you what that means, but basically it soups up your immune system. And the biotech company that had been working with this, Mid-Atlantic Biotherapeutics, was, and still is, trying to use it to treat cancer and as an adjuvant to treat COVID. But earlier on, they had done some groundbreaking work in late-stage rabies. So you don't hear about rabies much in the US because maybe 5 people a year die in the US, right? If you get bit, you go to the hospital, you get the shots. The shots are incredibly effective. Or you get them before you travel, right? And if you get bit, you don't get it. But for people who get rabies and don't have the shots, once you get past this certain window, it can be weeks, it could be a few months, but it's pretty short, you die. Nobody survives. And in countries like India and Pakistan and Malaysia and all over the rest of the world, where people don't have access, right, easy access to modern medicine, a lot of people die. They had, I think, compelling animal data, and this is one of the few diseases where the animal model is just like the human model. Animals get rabies, you can give them the shots or they die, right? Where the animals can survive. And there's nothing else that I'd ever seen where animals survived. So we licensed that. And again, in terms of our model, we licensed that because the inflection point there is the FDA's program, right, for priority review vouchers.
Right.
So only 3 years ago, rabies was added to the list of about 14 tropical diseases that the FDA provides these vouchers for. And they sell from anywhere between $80 to $120 million, right? So the point there is they want people to develop drugs for diseases that aren't going to be financially profitable because of the size of the population or whatever. And then you can sell this voucher to somebody like Novartis or Glaxo that has $1 billion a year drug. So they're saving $100 million a month. And if you get 6 months off the review time, right, it's $600 million. So you can do the math, right?
I actually have a question about the PRV. So can you go through a little bit of the steps needed to secure this and how long it typically takes?
So a PRV, you have to finish your pivotal trial and have marketing approval. Okay. And there's a few other things. It has to be on the list. And it can't be approved for any indication anywhere in the world, right? So in other words, you can't take a drug that's been approved in Turkey for something and get it approved here for something else that meets the PRV and get the PRV. So those are the basic, points of this. It has to be novel and important. Now, again, our model, which is a 2-year inflection point, right? The thing about rabies is because the patients always die, If you don't get treated in time, you always die. There's no gray area. There's
Right.
not going to be any confusion in the data. It's an absolute diagnosis, right? You know someone has rabies. There's a test. You can tell they had rabies. You can tell if they survive or they don't. And I believe that once we start to show survival in patients, we'll be able to go to the FDA. I think our data monitoring, independent data monitoring group will say, you have to stop the trial. You have to go to the FDA. You have to ask for accelerated approval because we
So,
can't let these people continue to die just because we're waiting for the trial. We don't
so,
know that will happen, right? But in my experience, that's the kind of thing where you can do that.
so I'm
And
curious.
yeah.
When you go to the FDA, how would a study be designed here in America when you don't really have access to patients that will have rabies? How would that study be designed?
The study is designed the way you design any study, right, to meet all of the FDA guidelines.
Sure.
And then we have centers, and again, we don't have signed agreements yet, so I can't announce it. We have centers in places where they have lots of patients, unfortunately. And,
With rabies?
yes. So,
Really? Here in America?
no, not in America.
No, that's what I'm asking. In America, so is the FDA going to consider data from
Absolutely.
other countries? Okay.
Sure. So the point with the FDA is it's the quality of the data, right? And their rules and regulations and procedures to a great degree define the quality, as you guys know, right? If you check all the boxes, you follow all their rules, you meet all of the QC and everything else, then it doesn't matter where you do the trial, right? As long as the ethics things check and everything else checks. So we will do all that. This trial will have the same protocols if we were doing it in the US, right? Only we're going to be doing it in a place where, unfortunately, these people walk out of the jungle with their kids and they say, well, we thought they were sick from something else, but now it's been, 6 weeks and they're foaming at the mouth and there's nothing they can do for them. And this happens 30 times a week in various
Wow.
right?
So,
Horrible.
so is there I'm assuming there's a test to see if somebody has rabies, correct?
There's an absolute diagnosis. It's not a diagnosis by omission. It's not a guess. Yes, it's
Okay.
a validated test. So all the patients will know actually have rabies. And
And did this drug go through phase 1 or?
so it's been in humans. I won't say it's been through phase 1, but it has been in humans to treat cancer,
Okay.
which was a program that was stopped, and it was in Argentina, which
Okay.
is where this drug was licensed from.
So I assume you're designing a phase 2 study to be ran in.
It's really I would think of it as an adaptive
Phase 1, 2.
1, 2, 3
Okay.
almost, right? So maybe we will think of in terms of 100 patients total, right? But there's no healthy volunteers getting this. There's already human data and safety data from the cancer drug trials. But this is the only thing that will change is there might be different doses because we did see different dose responses in the animal tests. So that there might be an escalating dose, which is why it's an adaptive 1, 2.
Mhm.
But again, no one survives. My guess is once you've treated 12 patients and you've shown,
11 survived. You're great.
the independent data monitoring board is going to say you got to stop the trial and go to the FDA. Now they could say no, do more, right? We're not convinced, but that's why we'll be recruiting 100 patients and planning as if we had to go further. But I think for us, it's a year to get the drug manufactured and to get the trial set up, and then 6 months to do the recruiting and treatment, and another 6 months to finish the data. So we're in our 2-year window to get to that inflection point.
I see.
Mhm.
And the inflection point would be to have the study complete in the case of rabies?
For this one, the inflection point is marketing approval.
Okay, I got you.
Because that's what you need to get the PRV.
Okay. And that makes sense. For the metformin, because this is the one where
Yeah,
most of the
metformin's
social
interesting.
media is interested in.
Yeah.
When do you expect to have the phase 1, 2 trials complete?
So I think I have said publicly that our goal is to have the IND filed to treat age related macular degeneration by the end of this calendar year. So as it turns out, metformin, we are reformulating it into an eye drop, right? So those other studies I talked about, we can't recruit 5,000 patients, right, to reach a statistical significance, okay?
Right.
And nobody knows, who took how much and things like that. What's clear is when you can put it directly on the eye, right, and get it directly to the cells you have to get it to, it's going to be much more effective at even much smaller doses. So there are multiple retinal degenerative diseases that all have similar symptoms and similar etiology. We're starting with dry AMD here in the US, for which there's no treatment, and wet AMD. And then Stargardt's is a very small orphan disease, which Dr. Barty has also worked on. Believe it or not, diabetic retinopathy is a serious disease that also, now there's little different issues there because those patients are taking metformin.
Right.
So the toxicity studies, right, and the dosing studies are very different for that. But our main focus for the metformin, the first one is the AMD, the macular degeneration, age-related. That is probably, and I say probably because again, we haven't signed a contract, right? But that's probably going to be a phase 1/2 because, so this is eligible for, again, this goes to our inflection point model, right? This drug is eligible for 505(b)(2), right, reformulation, sort of accelerated pathway with the FDA.
Right.
But typically, what you get there is that's if you've reformulated a drug and you're giving it to somebody because it's easier or lasts longer, right? But it's usually for the same indication. Here, we're reformulating it, but we're giving it to somebody for a totally different indication, right?
Gotcha.
So metformin is given to diabetics. It's not given to people with eye diseases. And so we don't know until we get in there and start talking to them in detail, how much more than the usual 505(b)(2) they're going to ask for.
I see.
There is literally millions of patients and decades of safety data on metformin.
Right.
So we may have to do a little more dosing escalation in the trials, but it's really not hard to figure out how much metformin is getting to the back of the eye, and then how much is leaking, if any, into the system, and is that more than patients should be getting? That's
right.
the toxicity issue there.
Is there a precedent? I mean, I know not for metformin, but under the 505(b)(2) pathway for repurposing drugs for completely different indications. So
Sure.
I'm sure you guys studied this, but what's the FDA's typical responses? Dose escalating?
Same thing. It is show us. So the thing about 505(b)(2) is it's not magic. Okay. What it does is it allows you to use the reference drug's safety data. Okay. And so that is where the magic is, because that saves you thousands of patients and years of development, right? And cost.
It essentially allows you to skip phase 1, correct?
Well, you can, again, companies will use it in different ways depending on what they want to learn from a trial. So, right, we don't think of phase 1 as just a step and then phase 2 as a step. Each phase of these clinical trials is giving you information, right? So the question is, what information do you need to know? In our first trial, whatever we call it, the information we want to be able to get is obviously that it's safe. And we should know that in advance because we know how much metformin people can take and how much will be getting through. We're really just confirming that with these patients. And then secondly, is enough of it permeating the outside of the eye and getting to the back of the, right, where the RPE cells are, okay? And so that really can only be identified by seeing improvement, right? Either delaying the onset of the macular degeneration and seeing levels of acuity improve, right? And so those are the things we look for in a trial. So each trial is designed to build to getting that information and getting it at the scale that the FDA will require for an ultimate approval. Again, metformin there's so much information on that drug out there in terms of safety systemically, right? Once it gets into people, that I don't think it's really going to be an issue. But you still have to do the studies. You have to do the preclinical, tox animals and everything else. But we don't expect there to be any issues there. And then it's a question of what is the recruiting size we need to show efficacy, right? The standards for showing efficacy, we don't have to make them up, right? Everybody knows how you measure acuity, and everybody knows how you measure, when you're supposed to get it, when you'd expect people to get it. So it's just a powering question, right? Of getting the right number of patients in, getting the right number of centers, designing the trial and getting it done. And I think, again, once we show that it's, confirm that it's safe and show that there is clearly signs of efficacy, as there have been in the animal studies and the in vitro studies at the mechanism of action level. Again, with our model, I think bringing in a large pharma or biotech partner is not going to be an issue, right? These are huge markets, unmet medical needs worldwide. We have worldwide IP that's, in the process. And again, because this just converted from a provisional to a complete patent in the US, and the PCT was filed at the same time, the patent life of this drug, if these patents are approved, that it'll have its entire patent life ahead of it, right? So the value of a drug, regardless of how good it is, right, to a small biotech company, is highly correlated to the length and value of the intellectual property, right? No big pharma is going to do a deal with you if they can just take it, right? So that's the reality, right? And
absolutely.
So this has its full patent life ahead of it, so it has maximum value. It's very good IP, and it's worldwide. So yeah, I think I can see why our shareholders have focused on metformin. It's our first. We've actually focused as much of our resources as we can on this to make sure we get that IND filed towards the end of this calendar year and get that trial started.
So what would be the, I don't know how to phrase this question, but what are you looking at? Is it, obviously it's not a cure, it's a delay, but will it be somebody that's developing some sort of eye issue in which they take this indefinitely?
It's different for different indications, and it's different at different time points. So ideally, if Dr. Barty is right, and we obviously believe he is, if you could get an age-related macular degeneration patient early enough before the disease sets in, you could put it off indefinitely. Right? So what happens in this disease is the RPE level, right, gets disrupted for various reasons. Age, so it's called age-related because basically we rust from the inside out. All right, and so
nice,
that
10-man
starts to come apart. And what's underneath it are these blood vessels, and they start to pop through where they shouldn't be, and then they're leaking because the vasculature is not right, and that causes all kinds of problems. Then there's all sorts of downstream problems that the RP cells aren't producing, the other things they do to help clean up the area. What this drug does, we believe, when we can put it in an eye drop directly on your eye, is that it just makes, it's a NOX4 inhibitor, what they call it. So that's an antioxidant almost, right? It prevents rust. Now, it does a lot of other things, but that's one of its primary mechanisms of action, all right? And because of that, if you can get it in early enough, you can stop that process, right? And so, yes, statistically speaking, you could probably get it approved by just showing that you're delaying the onset of the disease by some meaningful time point. You could also stop the downslope of the disease. And so that's not a cure, but if you can maintain the acuity level of a patient without it going down, right? I think, I don't know, they used to judge it by, do you lose more than 3 lines on the eye chart in a year, right? I think it's more specific than that now, but that's the kind of thing you're looking at in terms of preserving vision or losing vision. Now, there are diseases like Stargardt's that have these same problems, but they come from a genetic problem, right? There's an actual gene that's the problem. So there we're only treating the symptoms. We would not be treating the actual disease. But for age-related macular degeneration, we're not just treating the symptoms, we're actually trying to prevent the disease. And so the question is, how do you identify these patients early enough, right? So
Great question.
the reality is you're only going to identify them once they've been diagnosed, okay? And people are diagnosed at all kinds of different time points, right, on the thing. And there are tests now where you can actually see maybe a year before it even manifests itself. But again, who goes in for those tests, right? We don't know. So we'll be treating, probably early to mid stage dry macular degeneration patients in this trial, right? And that's based on math from when they're diagnosed and then from what their symptoms are. Now, probably 10% of those patients turn into wet AMD patients. We believe we can also treat that. That trial will probably not be done in the US. We are talking to a large eye hospital in India about doing a trial there. The problem is the COVID is so bad in India that nobody's doing anything right now. So it's hard to say when that would start. So the dry will be ahead of the wet at this point. The other issue with the wet is that there are treatments. It's the shot, literally shots into the eye. They started about every 3 months, and sometimes they go down to every 2 months. Obviously, patients hate it, but it works. It helps. And so people would obviously much rather take an eye drop than a shot. But
absolutely.
It's not ethical for a physician to withhold the shot from a patient who's been diagnosed. So we'd have to do the trial as a adjuvant first, right, with it, and then to tease out how much of it the improvement is our eye drop versus theirs. So maybe what will happen is that when we need the shots every 6 months instead of every 2 months, right? Something like that. But to tease that out would require a very large sample, right, population, and a very long look, right? And we're not built for that. We're built for finding out if it works, right, and moving it out the door. So that's, again, sort of informs what we go after when.
As far as the inflection point is concerned. So I'm fascinated by this because a lot of biotechs, they get founded because there's a scientist very passionate about a particular area that they've been researching. For you guys, it's completely built on this model. I've been reading something about SOAR, Science, Opportunity, Acceleration, Rare Disease. Is this the model that you're talking about?
We had a sort of a PR person who came up with that. It's in there, but it's actually not so meaningless, right? Because the heart of this company is that model, right? There's lots of great science out there, lots of great scientists, right?
Yes.
And that model, that SOAR, right, really is at the heart of what we do as a company.
Yeah. So I know Monica has a related question. I'm gonna let her ask it, but for a company like this, for a biotech like this to operate to thrive under this model, it really depends on, I'm assuming, a few key people doing all this homework. I mean, this information doesn't just fall out of the sky and hit you on the head.
No.
Who's the person or group of people? Was that you? I'm assuming you had a large role in this, or were there other people?
We have a clinical and scientific advisory board, and you can go on our website and you can see it. Ron Borden and Michael Grace, Dr. Grace is the chairman, right? Again, 30 years in big pharma, Bristol Myers Squibb, all these places. Ron Borden's the same thing. Dr. Demeter, I'm going to mispronounce his name. Dimitro, who's the head of the antibody cancer program at Pitt. He was at NIH. He was the guy who discovered the CD56 human monoclonal, has joined our advisory board also. Kapil Bharti from the NEI at NIH has also joined our board. So you have to understand, having scientists is one thing, right? But having the inventors of the technology is a completely different thing. So in my prior life at Neuralstem, we had the inventor of human neural stem cells. And he was working every day, all day on trying to commercialize that, right? You can have people in your advisory board, great people, right? But they have limited attention span, right? They're doing a billion other things. And these guys are too, right? But they're heavily, heavily vested in their own technology. And that's why they joined our board, in addition to just, licensing us the stuff, to make sure that it actually works. So when you talk to an inventor, right, when you license something, all you see is what's in the patent, what they did. You don't know what they didn't do. You don't know what they tried that failed, right?
Right.
And I've been there and I failed many times, right? You can walk down that path saying, oh, this makes sense, right? And then it turns out they tried that 3 years ago and it didn't work, right? And so having these guys is also the key, as you say, a core group of people is so key to this model. You couldn't do this just bringing these things in, right? You need to have the people who know what all the wrong turns are, right? What all the blind alleys are, so that when you start designing the path forward, you optimize, right, your time and resources. And so it was very key for us to be able to get their buy-in and their involvement. And then again, yes, between myself and Mike and Ron and Paul and Demeter and Nick Bolas at Emory and a couple other people, we've all managed large projects and large groups worldwide of clinical trials and resources. And so being able to set up this kind of near virtual model, I won't say it's second nature because it's difficult, but the world of Zoom, right, and expectations that you're only going to talk online instead of traveling, right, and things like that have actually made this easier.
Yeah, you could do more. That brings me to the next question. That Monica has one that's very much related to what you just said. Are you done with new new things to look at, or are these three enough, or are you guys continuously looking for things to fit the model?
The model is Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3, Gen 4, right? This is a model that we think is sustainable, right? So again, the goal is acquire at advantageous terms, get to the inflection point, get it out the door to a partner that has the appetite and the resources to commercialize. Okay. And as we do that, we bring more in. So we are always, if you talk to anybody in business development at a biotech company, even a conventional biotech company, their time is always split between trying to find partners for what they have and trying to bring new stuff in, right? And big pharma, they have different people doing those, right? Those things are separated. But at most companies, it's the same business development people that split their time doing both. And we're no different. Right. So we are always talking to people about what's our Gen 2, what's our Gen 3. As the model evolves, we may find that there's something else we should have looked for, or that we were right and that we should only look for this thing. Right. I mean, this is an iterative process. But again, we all have decades of experience. We've all seen programs that have worked, programs that have failed. So it's, I'm sorry, do you have a question?
Yeah, Monica has got a question. Yeah. I've got to stop interviewing CEOs because I get too excited with what you guys say. I want to go buy all this stocks. Monica, I know you have a good question.
Yes. Hi, Richard.
Hi, Monica.
Thank you for being with us today. So my question is, how a lawyer ended up in research? Because I was reading your background, and I know you're a lawyer, that you started a company. You're one of the co-founders of a neural STEM since 1996. So it seems like basically your whole career has been in research.
Yeah, so I'm much older than you think. My whole career was not. I was an attorney. I did medical malpractice litigation, as well as actually some real estate development. But in the mid-90s, my son was sick, and I I actually met, he became friends with the son of Dr. Carl Joe, who invented neural stem cells at NIH. And I don't live 10 minutes from NIH. And we became friends. And we decided, at the time, his technology was based on very controversial human embryonic cell related technology. And so he didn't think the government was going to fund it. So we decided to take it out of NIH, which is where I had my first experience licensing something from NIH, and then just go raise the money and develop it as a company. And so since the mid 90s, I have been strictly in this field. And, biotech is addictive. It's great to be thinking you're doing something that can, help people. And I've had the great fortune to work with the inventors of the technology always that we've worked on. So you're talking to guys who know literally more than anyone else in the world about what you're talking to, right? And that in itself is a huge advantage, right? I mean, there's lots of brilliant PhDs out there, but there's only one inventor of each of these technologies. And they're the guys you want to be working with. So that's what I've tried to stick with.
Wow. I mean, I can tell the
Impressive.
passion. Yeah, I can tell the passion. It's like this is why we like to interview the CEOs, founders, co-founders, because there's always something more than just the business. And I've noticed that trend for a lot of these successful biotech. So I appreciate you sharing that, especially the backstory in regards to your son and how that definitely played a pivotal role in you getting into biotech. I think that's powerful, powerful story. If you have time, we do have some questions from the community,
Yeah, happy.
Richard. Okay, feel free. Don't blame me for these questions, okay?
No,
I'm
they're
just a
always better than
messenger.
you think. Let me tell you.
Okay, so why not? Oh, we'll just get into it. Speed round. Why not press release the recent $600,000 financing deal?
We did report it. Um, press releases to me are important, but they are public relations. This was not a public relations item, right? This was just a fact. That's what we do. We put out the facts and we raise the money and we put it in. Once we file the Form 10, it'll be an 8K. Here it was just a report to OTC markets, but that's not a press release worthy item.
I like that. I like that, Richard. You're part of the new generation. You don't care so much about press release. You come on YouTube and say what you got to say. I respect that. Much respect for
We'll
that.
see.
That's the next decade. This is what it's gonna be. Number two, plus it's an invitation to come back, Richard. I got it. All right, number two, is the company working on any other financing? And if so, does that involve investment banks?
So the answer is yes. Biotech companies are like cars. They need fuel, and our fuel is money, right? Nobody works for free. You can't do all this work without paying the
They don't?
clinical people and everything. We have not at this point retained an investment banker. We've been approached by many. When the time is right and we found the right fit, we most likely will do that. I have to also here just refer everyone to the website, to the forward-looking statements little disclaimer, because you got me talking about forward-looking statements now. And I'm not going to hold up a copy of it, but please go to the website, read that, and take that as written. Okay. But so the answer is yes, we will be raising money, but I can't say when or anything more about it than that.
Yeah, all these rules around communication is ridiculous. Number three, is the company open to any mergers and acquisitions? I think you answered that more or less.
We're agnostic. The point is to get these drugs to people because I can help them. Whatever the best path is, that's the path we will take.
This is a good one. So what's been the biggest roadblock so far when it comes to the rabies or just any of the three?
So the real issue out in the real world today is COVID. So everybody who has manufacturing facilities anywhere in the world that can be applied to the COVID vaccines or the glassware that they go in or the needle, whatever it is, right? All of those resources are completely 100% booked, right? And the governments are paying whatever those people are asking. So that is the biggest roadblock. There's right now for us a 6-month waiting window to be able to start manufacturing the rabies drug, right? When that 6 months is up, who knows whether or not that'll still be the case, and they'll be freed up or not. This new Delta variant could change everything, or it may not.
Yeah.
If the vaccines are good against it, that's the single biggest unknown. Same with clinical trials. In India, you can't start a clinical trial on anything else, right? They don't want people in the hospital. They don't want doctors, don't want to be in the hospitals, right? That in the US, we're starting to get back to normal. I will tell you, the FDA is not doing meetings. They're not even doing Zoom calls. You just have to submit everything in writing with a briefing book. If it's not COVID related, you can't even get in to talk to them. So
Wow.
that's different. We'll see how much of a roadblock it ends up being.
Yeah, great answer. I think that's the investors often they don't see the whole picture. They don't know the context of this. They just look at everything objectively. Number 5, I guess we kind of answered this. Will the company increase their investor relations and awareness? I would say yes. The YouTube. This is what YouTube's for.
We're here. Also, Steve Chiswick. Steve is on this, I know, listening. Anybody that has questions for investor relations can email investor relations at Curative Biotechnology, and Steve will answer.
I think I understand what this acronym means, but I understand the first 3 letters. Hopefully, you understand all 5. When is the goal for uplist or at least OTC QB status?
Yeah, so that's actually a great question. Our plan, as I said, we are undergoing and just about finished with our PCAOB audit, which is required to uplist either to an exchange or to QB. So our plan is, as soon as we have the audit completed, we will file the Form 10, which makes us completely SEC reporting. And that, along with our existing shareholder base and price, will qualify us, I believe, automatically right now for QB, for OTC QB. But the whole point of that is that there's more information available. And the fact that we're filing a Form 10, which makes us completely SEC reporting, right, accomplishes the same thing. But that, I think, is a fairly imminent process. And again, there's no telling exactly when the audit will be finished, but we expect it to be done soon. We expect to file the Form 10 soon. The SEC typically takes 30 to 45 days to review those things, but you never know. Could be longer, could be shorter. And once that's all done, we should be eligible to uplist wherever it is we want to go to.
Okay. One more, and no details required, just yes or no. So far, have any big pharma approached you yet?
We can't talk about that.
Okay.
Lisa, I have
There's the
also
third
another
option, Dan,
question.
other than yes or no.
That's right. These guys are smart. They put only like 2 choices when there's actually 3.
That's right.
I have another question, and I don't know if you can answer this just yet, but when thinking about the commercialization of that drug, like for example, for the rabies, that is obviously in countries that don't have much access to, let's say, the vaccine,
Right.
how's that going to work?
So that obviously that's an issue, not just for that, but for the metformin drug also, right? And so there are lots of places around the world where people don't have access to Lucentis or Eylea, right? The shots for wet macular degeneration. And so we're looking at all of that. The WHO is somebody that we'll probably want to work with. We have a clinical trial set up, right? We have the infrastructure set up to do this trial in places that unfortunately do see lots of these patients. In terms of once it becomes approved, the distribution of that, that's hard to predict right now. But it's not a model we have to invent. There's lots of drugs and lots of vaccines that are given out throughout the world, right? Especially now after COVID. There's been an incredible amount of infrastructure created by nonprofits, right, and organizations to literally get vaccines and shots to people who don't normally have access, right, to quality medicine. So from that point of view, I think our timing might be pretty good, and we might, it's horrible to say that there's a good outcome from this. But because of the COVID crisis, this infrastructure worldwide to the third world mostly, which is where rabies is the real problem, untreated, is going to be more accessible than it would have been before the COVID crisis.
Okay, and my next question, thank you for that answer. And my next question is, for example, if I know the macular degeneration when it's related to age, the Americans or the white Americans have more tendency to develop this condition. However, when it comes to the one related to diabetes, is mostly the largest population that have a tendency to develop this condition are the Hispanic community. And actually, I was reading that number one country that develops diabetes around the world is Mexico. Have you guys considered do the clinical trials there?
We have actually looked at that issue. So I think actually India has the largest diabetes problem. We've been speaking with an eye hospital in India. They have something like 80 million diabetic patients, going to 130 in the next decade or something like that, he told us. And it's just enormous. But believe it or not, Asians in general, including in India, don't get dry AMD and wet AMD like we do. There's something different genetically there, and they get sort of a mixture of the two. It's very different. We're now looking at whether or not that's the same thing in Latin America, because we're thinking very, very seriously about doing trials in Colombia for wet AMD. But I don't know yet what that answer is. We have the world's experts, from NEI looking at this for us, but it hasn't been generally acknowledged or talked about that different racial groups have different versions, right, actually, of these macular degenerative diseases. And so we will go where the science takes us, right, in terms of doing that. And we'll see.
Oh, that's amazing. Very interesting to know that information. Well, in the case that you guys decide to do it in Colombia or Mexico, we can always collaborate.
I looked up all your stuff. I know what you guys do, and I hear you.
Uh-oh. Thank you, Richard. You've been amazing at answering questions. It's refreshing to get a CEO willing to answer questions. I really think it's a great story. I think I'm actually intrigued by the business model because I think it's somewhat unique from the ones we've looked at least this year when we started analyzing stocks. So we really appreciate it. Open invitation, not just for yourself, but anyone else from the company that would like to come on and get interviewed. Maybe we can go like more in depth on each therapeutic condition, because I think there's a lot that we didn't get into with glioblastoma. It just, as you can see, it's not enough time to cover everything you guys are doing. I mean, and this for such a small market cap company, I've never seen something like this. At least we've only been doing it this year.
We won't always be such a small market cap company.
That's right. That's right. Let's see, guys. We need to make sure. Yeah, I mean, I got to stop interviewing CEOs because I get too excited and want to buy the shares all the time.
Yeah, me too.
Chris, Monica, any more questions?
Oh, it was a pleasure, though. It was nice meeting you.
Yeah,
Richard.
nice meeting you. Thank you for all your answers.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you guys for watching and listening. And we'll do more on Curative Biotechnologies. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.